important later. You just never know when these sort of disputes might come about later. Your bank statement will do if it's going out on AP.
Oh, and like we said as well, bond can be up to 4 weeks' rent. Check that the bond is lodged, and you should receive proof of that. Okay, let's get into a scenario. So I've been living with a flatmate for about 6 months, and I haven't actually talked to my landlord since I've moved in. I think he's going through a property manager. I did notice a few problems with dripping taps and whatnot. Nothing too big, so I thought I'd bring it up at the next inspection. Although a few days later, the hot water just completely blew out. We had to take showers elsewhere and boil jugs for hot water. We try our best to contact the landlord, but we can't, and we are told that he's left the country. What can we do?
Well, I think the first most important thing is to not just stop paying your rent. You must keep paying your rent to fulfill your half of the bargain in your tenancy agreement. If you stop paying the rent, the landlord can kick you out. And that's the worst case scenario. Plenty of cases have come through the office about this, and the other thing to think about is to ask your landlord to fill out a contact sheet. There's a good chance this property is being managed, or that he's at a point that he's got a point of contact in the country when he goes overseas that you can get hold of. At this point, it's probably best to contact the law service and run this problem by them as well, because I'm sure they could help you.
For sure. Now, there are a number of rights here that you do have as well. So I'll just make you briefly aware of those. So you can issue and serve a 14-day notice on the landlord to fix the problem, and you can even file an application in the Tenancy Tribunal for this. The complicating thing here is at what point did you contribute to the damage caused by not telling the landlord? For example, if this tap is dripping and it's causing a massive problem that you really didn't foresee, then that's a sort of a situation where you may have contributed to it by not telling the landlord about it. But nevertheless, if the situation is urgent, you can fix it yourself and get the landlord to reimburse you on his return.
So there's rights under the Residential Tenancies Act and duties for tenants and landlords both to do. Tenants have to pay their rent on time, and if they don't, they can be evicted after 21 days. Going back to that scenario, the tenants have a duty to tell the landlord when the place needs repairing. If you saw the damage on the house and you didn't tell the landlord, then it could be your fault when things go wrong. An example of this is when the house floods, like we were talking about before. If the landlord got there and fixed the problem early, it might be way cheaper to fix. But now that things have gone totally wrong, you have contributed to the damage in a way, so you may be liable for some of the cost.
Also, you have to pay service charges such as electricity or water, not to your landlord unless your landlord is actually managing those and giving you quotes each week. Most importantly, you have to keep the property clean and tidy and leave it in that way. If you leave behind a mess, then you might have to give up some of your bond to put your house back the way it was. So you're under a duty to keep it tidy and free of any damage. Obviously, if you cause damage to the property, then you could be liable, as Keisha Castle Hughes and her boyfriend will maybe soon be finding out, allegedly. It is also actually quite expensive to get rid of rubbish in large quantities. So if you leave stuff behind, don't be surprised to pay a potentially hefty bill.
Yeah, definitely. So what about situations where the landlord is coming around all the time?
Well, that actually happens quite a lot, unfortunately. So now, if we said there's rules around the amount of times a property inspection can take place, so I'll just add that the landlord has a duty to provide you quiet enjoyment of the premises. So for all intents and purposes, the property is there for your reasonable use, so long as it isn't hurting anybody. It's also the duty of the landlord for maintenance of fair wear and tear of the property, so this includes complying with health and safety standards. Going back to that previous scenario as well, the landlord has a duty to provide an agent if they're gone for 21 days. You should also get contact info for that agent to contact him, and it's particularly important for maintenance purposes.
Yeah, for sure. Another type of case we get all the time is that it isn't lawful for a landlord to withhold goods for not paying rent unless they get an order by the Tenancy Tribunal to do so. There are, in fact, specific procedures for dealing with goods that the tenant has left behind as well. If the tenant leaves behind goods, then the landlord must make a reasonable attempt to contact the tenant about these goods. The landlord has to securely store personal papers for at least 35 days and then hand them over to the police if still unclaimed. If contact was unsuccessful or the goods are still there after a reasonable reasonable period of time, then the landlord has a choice.
The landlord can either apply to the Tenancy Tribunal for an order disposing of the property or dispose of the goods at market value. It's probably best to go through the tribunal to be safe for all the landlords out there, and the tribunal can order that money owed can be recovered against those goods. If the landlord chooses the second option, then they have to assess the goods, and if the proceeds of sale would be more than the cost of storing them, then they have to store them for 35 days. The tenant can claim the goods or any proceeds owing, if applicable, at any time, and the landlord pays the money into the Department of Labour. Both parties will have to apply to claim the money.
So as you can see, there's a lot of requirements and a lot of nuts and bolts there. So if you have any issue about this, then as I said, this is an information-only sort of radio show, and it's best to seek proper legal advice if you've got any issues like this. So in addition to our walk-in clinics, we also have an advice line, and that runs from Monday to Thursday, 1:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon, and that's on 0800 529 463. That's 0800 529 463. So that's free off your cell phone as well. So let's get back to this shortly and check out what's happening in our community for this month. This segment will let you know of some of the great things going on in the western and northern Auckland areas of our great city this month. If you'd like to let people know about your community event, then send me an email on info@waitakere.org.nz and we can make it happen. So, oh my gosh, there are a lot of events happening in March out west. We've picked a few that sound really interesting and we'd encourage you to get along. So firstly, on Monday the 12th of March, so that's the day after this airs, I believe, there's a big public meeting at the council chambers in Henderson around the long-term plan for the city. The Mayor has a vision for Auckland to be the most livable city in the world, and this is going to require a lot of work and a lot of planning and a lot of discussion. So this is really your chance to get in there and have your say about these sort of things. The meetings that I've been to about this so far have already been quite vocal, and there's been quite a lot of good debate, so that's pretty great. It's a pretty good chance. So it's going on at 6:30 p.m. on Monday the 12th of March. That's at the council chambers in Henderson, so I'd check that out. Corbin Rebel Lawyers.